provisions of the Ontario Human Rights Code, their policy with regards to workplace harassment, which the university implied that I was engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct where the course of comment or conduct is known or ought reasonably be known to be unwelcome. So what happened essentially was the university reviewed what I had done, and then they reviewed the policies as laid out on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website. The university reviewed my videos and they decided that what I said was true. They decided that the video I made was probably illegal and that they were responsible for it. And so in an attempt to distance themselves from me, under counsel from their legal people, and believe me, the university has good legal people, they sent me a warning. And this is what happens if you want to discipline a recalcitrant employee, essentially, so that you don't have to bear legal responsibility for their acts. And after the third warning, you can take further steps. Now, I pointed out to the university at one point when we were discussing how this forum was going to proceed, that perhaps it would be in their best interests to not support the people who were trying to stop me from talking, but instead to support me legally, and if necessary to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. And the university said categorically that they would not do that. So I would say, when it comes to the contradictory provisions that are in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and so we might say roughly equality versus freedom of speech, the university decided which side they're going to go down on. So on October 18th, the university mentioned to me in another warning letter that if personal pronouns are being used, the refusal to use the personal pronoun that is an expression of the person's gender identity can constitute discrimination. So now, you see what's happened is that I haven't refused to use someone's gender-neutral pronouns. I said that I would refuse. So it's not even the refusal itself that's producing the letters. It's my declared intent to engage in the refusal. And as far as I was concerned, what I was essentially doing was criticizing a piece of legislation that had not yet been passed. But the university's legal department decided that all that was sufficient for them to distance themselves from me and to engage in disciplinary activity. So, and then with regards to these human rights tribunals where all this stuff would be sorted out, it's like those places destroy your reputation and destroy you financially. And can they put you in jail? Well, it's a complicated argument in some sense, but I can tell you that if you refuse to pay the fines, that's the next step. The federal people have indicated that these policies will be interpreted in accordance with the Ontario Human Rights Commission's policies online. And so you guys should go read those, because those are not fun. And I would say that they pose an incredible threat to your liberty. And it's all done under the guise of compassion. People who keep pushing that on you are making a massive mistake. And they're infantilizing you. And they're terrifying people in the university community, as you can tell by the letter that I just read. And I've received dozens of letters like that. People are afraid to say anything because they're going to get targeted. And if you wonder or not if that's true, then just think about what happened to me. And ask yourself if it's true. Good enough.
Thank you. As a Trinity College and OISE alumnus, I'm typically delighted to return to the University of Toronto. Today is different. To make sense of what it means to be here today, I've found myself going back frequently to the 1989 debate at Western on the subject of race and IQ between Philip Rushton and David Suzuki. To borrow David Suzuki's opening words on that day, quote, "I do not want to be here. I do not want to dignify this man and his ideas in public debate," end quote. There was, in 1989 at Western, as now, an extraordinary media frenzy concerning the apparent threat to academic freedom posed by the mere possibility that academic freedom is not an absolute guarantee, that as scholars, our relationship with knowledge and with the public trust is tempered by responsibilities and limitations. Of crucial import to my argument today is that this is a relationship structured not on juridical grounds. This is not about the law, but on ethical grounds. The very real effects of the knowledge claims that we make as scholars require that our claims be subjected to rigorous critical scrutiny. And there is no set of knowledge claims more important to subject to critical scrutiny than statements that appear to perpetuate and to incite already existing forms of hatred, violence, and prejudice toward members of minority groups. We need to identify and address the claims made in the recent public works of Jordan Peterson, claims about trans people, claims about the validity of gender identity, claims about the proper use of pronouns, and claims about academic freedom rights. And let's be clear, we have a unique difficulty here today in subjecting these claims to scholarly scrutiny. What kind of claims can you have in amateurish videos? The recent public works of Jordan Peterson provide a fabulous case study of the cultural production of true believers, the cultural production of ignorance in an age of reactionary populism. So let's take a look at how consequential and studied ignorance works in relation to gender. Here are the major claims of Dr. Peterson's recent public works, specifically the first of 3 lectures concerning Bill C-16. And I will quote directly here from my lecture transcript. Bill C-16 scares me, lectures Dr. Peterson. The Ontario Human Rights Commission is a particularly pathological organization. Social justice warrior types are overrepresented, and I can't help but think it's because our current premier is a lesbian. And the LGBT community has become extraordinarily good at organizing themselves and has a fairly pronounced and very, very sophisticated radical fringe. Gender identity and gender expression are not valid ideas. They're not true. There's no evidence for it. I don't know what the options are if you don't identify as a man or a woman. There's an idea that there's a gender spectrum. I think it's an ill-informed opinion, end quote. Rather than to address himself to the scientific evidence concerning gender identity and expression, and by adopting rhetorical strategies more common to BreitbartNews.com than a university professor's lecture, Dr. Peterson goes on to discredit the very constructs on political grounds instead of on grounds provided by scholarly evidence, that these constructs are, in no particular order, leftist, radical, and politically correct. On the subject of pronouns and gender expression, Dr. Peterson is emphatic that, quote, I don't recognize another person's right to determine what pronouns I use to address them. I won't do it. For the vast majority of people, he goes on to say, gender identity and sexual orientation, and I guess he means sex, are the same thing, end quote. As for the definition of transgender, Dr. Peterson claims that, and I quote, I don't believe that these people, these terms stand for good things. I think that these people use these terms as a pretense that they stand for good things, as a pretext for them to continue their nefarious activities, end quote. Well, this is hardly the stuff of academic scholarship. I'm a member of the Global Education Initiative of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and I can tell you without a shred of doubt that there is no link between the public claims made by Professor Jordan Peterson about gender generally and transgender specifically, and a body of easily accessible peer-reviewed scholarship. This body of peer-reviewed research knowledge provides conclusive evidence that whereas anatomical sex is perhaps dimorphically categorical, and that's only if we choose to ignore intersex, that secondary sex characteristics cannot be argued simplistically to be determined by chromosomal sex, and that there is highly significant diversity in gender identity and expression, which exists on a continuum that reveals persistent differences that cannot be explained by sex assigned at birth. Gender identity and expression are dynamic, biosocial aspects of human diversity that are culturally and socially in a complex relationship with matter. Gender identity and expression are linked both to the extraordinary plasticity of human life and the fluidity of identity, and as well, and this is where we must pay close attention, linked to gender-based violence, to minority stress, and threats to a whole host of rights in Canada that are not up for debate here today. These rights include the right to recognition, the right to communicability of presence, the right to culturally competent institutional climates, and perhaps the most profound of all rights, the right to safety and the right to culture and access to knowledge. Whereas almost all the media attention on the Jordan Peterson affair has focused on the possible threat to his academic freedom, I want to focus instead on the ethical significance of an academic's total dereliction of academic responsibility. Academics are never free to distribute totally bogus claims while trading on the value provided by their title as a professor in a great Canadian university, and, perhaps even worse, as a clinician registered by an accreditation body. Quite the contrary. Every faculty member takes on academic responsibilities that embody an ethical commitment, which is precisely not responsibilities required by the law. Academic knowledge that appears to codify knowledge about minority populations must not add to the harms already facing minority groups by itself contributing to the consolidation of ignorance, nor by inciting hatred toward members of these groups. Faced with Philip Rushton's perpetuation of racist assumptions in his research on race and IQ in the 1989 debate, David Suzuki concludes that one can only infer, quote, "He is either grossly ignorant or deliberately mischievous. Either way, what is required is action by scientists and academics. His claims must be denounced. This is not science," end quote. Surely, the deliberate production of ignorance concerning a precarious minority group constitutes evidence of the most unethical abnegation of the responsibility of academics to contribute to human well-being, collective intelligence, flourishing, and the survival of planetary life. The institution of the public university cannot and must not sanction ignorance. And most emphatically, we must denounce the deliberate cultural production of ignorance. We can and we must do better. And we must do better, not because it is prescribed by the law, but because we have an ethical commitment to contribute to the advancement of knowledge in a democratic society. Thank you.
In law, we tend to distinguish between the law as it is and the law as we would like it to be. And the experts you cited seem to be critical of the law as it is, along with you. But does Professor Kosman's outlining of some of the elements of C-16 in particular, does that give you any comfort? Does it allay any of your concerns that it really focuses on the advocacy of genocide or the commission of hate crimes, and that those kinds of things are probably the sort of restrictions that most people in the room would think were reasonable restrictions?
No, it doesn't give me any comfort. And the reason it doesn't give me any comfort is because, as far as I'm concerned, what this is actually about has already played itself out in my case, and I already explained that to you. I would say a legal doctrine is something like a virus, and it has a life.
That's not what we think.
If you let it go into a living system, it propagates and it has effects, and the effects are a consequence of the philosophy that's embedded inside the law. And if you really want to know about this, you should read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, because what he does in that book is tell you how the hypothetically humane doctrines that were embedded in radical Marxism at the end of the 1800s unfolded into Soviet society and demolished it. But I want to tell you a little bit about what the law does. And this is with regards to its interpretation from the policy guidelines. It instantiates social constructionism into our legal system. You have to understand what that means. There's a huge debate about how human identity is upon what grounds human identity is predicated. Now, the radical social constructionists basically say that identity is nothing but a social construction, and that's in keeping with their philosophical doctrines, partly Marxist and partly postmodern. But that isn't, and that was what I was objecting to with regards to Bill C-16, because it insists, do you understand this? It makes this legal doctrine that biological sex, gender identity, gender expression